Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining for another session of Azure Power Lunch. And today's topic are some of the Azure AKS updates. And the two of them that we're going to talk about are managed identity, the use of managed identity, and the second one is Spot instance support for AKS. Once again, I just want to clarify one thing. Some of you have asked, like, if they can invite, like who are Microsoft team members who are joining, if they can invite their customers. Please note that this call is open to customers, partners, and internal folks. We do not discuss any NDA information. So, I mean, we only discuss public information. So whatever is available in public RAM, we talk about it and we share it. So that's why please feel free to share it with your customer partner, as this is not an NDA call. So let's move on with our topic of discussion. By the way, the slide deck, PDF of that will be shared. Um, in the it will be in the description. The link of that to that will be in the description of the YouTube video in our YouTube channel. Okay, so let's talk about quickly on the managed identity. So I hope everybody knows about managed identity. Just quick overview. Managed identity are a special form of service principal. They live in Azure AD, but think of it as lightweight service principal. And there are two types of it. One is system managed identity, which is attached to a service instance that you create. When you create a service instance, in most cases, you can go in and create a system um, managed identity, and what it does, system assigned managed identity, and what it does is it gives an identity of that to that instance. So let's say you have an app service, you create a managed identity for that, and then you give that managed identity access to a key vault, and that's how it can access information in the key vault. And that's kind of that simplifies um, the whole access model, and you don't have to kind of use the keys. So this is MSI based access. On the other hand, user managed identity, you can create it and you can assign it to multiple resources. Just keep in mind, access to the user managed identity to different resources. I mean, that's how you can, let's say if you have a particular resource that you want to give access to multiple resources, instead of using their managed identity individually, you can have a user managed identity, and that's how you can give access to that resource. So with that information, how managed identity works in AKS. If you create an AKS cluster, you have to create um, basically what you do is you have to create a service principal. Either it is created automatically if you have appropriate access on that Active Directory. Otherwise, you have to create it yourself before you create a cluster. In this case, in the case of managed identity, um, there are two managed identity that are created for you. One is system assigned managed identity. This is basically tied to the life cycle of the cluster, and this is tied to the cluster itself. It doesn't um, have much role outside. It is kind of create resources, inside the Kubernetes cluster. On the other hand, there is an identity that is created for that is assigned to the pool. That is the user managed identity, and that is the more interesting one, because that's the identity that you use to connect to ACR, that to connect to kind of getting metadata to Azure. So that's more interesting managed identity. Just keep in mind that this does not talk. I mean, we are not talking about identities or managed identities assigned to the pod themselves. We are still talking about the management plane, um, and we are staying at the cluster. Okay, yes, at some point there will be managed identity available to the pods in AKS. There is a project out there. If you search for it, it's kind of a upstream project that is out there. At some point, it will be a part of mainstream AKS implementation, and it will be go through appropriate public preview and GA. But right now, that is still in an upstream thing and we are not talking about that when we talk about managed identity with AKS. This is still at the management plane we are staying with. Okay. A few limitation. You cannot create a cluster and then assign managed identity to it. You have to create these managed identity at the time of creating the cluster. Okay. You can, if you have an existing cluster and you want to use managed identity, I'm sorry. I mean, you will have to uh, delete it and recreate it with managed identity. That's all you can do. So there is no way to upgrade or update it to use managed identity. That cannot happen. Um, and here is how you do it. So put simply, this is in public preview. This is what you add when you create an AKS cluster. Basically, you just turn on enable managed identity, and it will create the cluster with managed identity there. Okay. Just keep in mind there is no UI support for it right now. So if you wanna do through UI, I don't couldn't find a way to do it through the UI so far. And by the way, it is also supported for private clusters as well. So if you have a private cluster, um, we talked about it a few sessions ago about private cluster where you create a cluster which has no public endpoint and you only access it through private link, blah blah blah. I mean, even that cluster support managed identity. So that's kind of um, that support is there as well. So I know that normally we do demo in the end, but I just want to show you a few things. So just for the sake of time, since we only have 30 minutes, I have taken the liberty of creating um, uh, a cluster with managed identity. So let's take a look at it. This is the cluster itself. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the resource group. You know, whenever you create a cluster in a resource group, it has the cluster, and then the rest of the stuff is in in a different resource group, which starts with MC something underscore. I mean, that's sometimes a bit confusing, but that's the way it is. So let's go into that resource. So this is the managed, what I call the managed resource group. As you can see, there is the managed identity of we were talking about. And this is a user managed identity agent pool. So let's click on it. Okay, as you can see, this is user assigned managed identity. This is the identity we talked about. And this is the identity that that is kind of we can use to work with ACR and things like that. So this is the user assigned managed identity. And to identify it, it ends with dash agent pool. Okay, so let's say that if you have an ACR, and what we are gonna do is we're gonna go here and we're gonna find our ACR here. So we have set up an ACR, and yeah, that's the one. And and in that ACR, we have set up access control. And if we do see the role assignment, you will see one role assignment to ATT, AKS, ATT, CUS agent pool. So this is the user managed identity that we talked about. So we have given it access to pull the images from this ACR. By the way, if you may be aware that there is a command in CLI where you can do attach ACR with the AKS. That command does not work right now uh, with this managed identity. So if you try to do it, it will either fail or it will not produce the desired result. What you will have to do is you will have to oops, you will have to use something like this. Hopefully everybody can see it. Let me increase the size a little bit. You will have to use something like this, the command that I'm highlighting, where you are assigning basically ACR pull access to the scope, and the scope that you have to assign to, it's gonna be, this is the scope is the resource ID of the ACR, Azure Container Registry, and assignee is the agent pool, user managed identity. So that's what you will do to assign it. Okay. Once you do it, then it will have access to it. Okay. Any questions? So let's come back to it. By the way, if we look at the, let me just look at Kubernetes services, and we look at the cluster, there is no managed identity node here. Normally, whenever you create a resource, you have an identity node, and you click on it, then you will see what property there are. For some reason, they don't have an identity node here, but this cluster does have an identity. And I can show it to you. For example, if I go here and if I try to add a role assignment, and let's say I just pick any role owner or something, because we're not going to do, and I type in AKS ATT. You see, this is the identity that is the system managed identity that we talked about. So two identities, one the user managed, that is more interesting, that is what we're going to be using, that's ends with agent pool. The second one, this is the system managed, that's kind of internally used by AKS. We don't have to worry about it, but in any case, these are the two that you have to be aware of. Okay, it is there for some reason. I'm not sure why they don't expose it here on the blade. Normally, if you look at other resources, you will see an identity over there, but in this case, there is no identity. But just want to make it clear that this is something that you will come across as you are creating managed identity pools. Okay. So any other question before we move on to the second topic, which is spot instances? Okay. Let's move on to the second topic. Yes. So spot instances, support for Azure Spot, support for Azure Kubernetes Service. So what are spot instances? So in every Azure region, we have some extra capacity. That capacity is there so the customer can scale out, or if there are instances where we need more, customer need extra resources, things like that. So we keep a buffer of that extra capacity that is there, that is not used. What we can do is we can offer you that capacity at a much lower price of what's the original price of that the resource are. So that's what we call spot instances. They're very similar to AWS spot instances, and probably we will do a session later on to cover what they can and cannot do. So that's the basically that's 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 the support that AKS has added. So now you can create AKS pools, node pools with Spot instances. So basic, what you can do is you can create a Spot. I mean, you can create a new pool with just Spot instances, and you can use it for workloads where eviction is not a big deal. So let's say you're doing a batch processing. You want to run like maybe 100 nodes, and if those nodes, half of them certainly may disappear, no worries, because the batch processing, it's kind of doing parallel processing to less node. It will just take more time. Okay. If you're doing dev and test, that's a perfect scenario for that. No worries. If node disappear, that's okay. I mean, you're not paying. You're not paying the same price. So yeah, no big deal. Um, because it doesn't have adverse impact. Just keep in mind, in case of Spot, the big thing is Azure may take that capacity back as customer needs it, so they may disappear. Uh, so they're wonderful, but there are some very important limitation that you have to keep in mind. First of all, Spot instances, a node pool with Spot instances cannot be the primary node pool. Okay, so if you are creating an AKS cluster, you cannot just create a cluster based on Spot nodes. You have to create a primary node pool, maybe with just one node with the standard instances. What I mean is non-Spot instances. So you have to create a pool with just non-Spot instances. Okay. Second thing to keep in mind is that you can you know you will have to label your instances if you want them to explicitly take advantage of the Spot. And we will take a look at the syntax for that, and then we will talk about like how you set labeling, and that's where the tainting of instances comes into picture. Okay. So that's and I've listed some more things. I mean, you cannot upgrade them all together. You will have to upgrade the first. Let's say if you're doing an upgrade, you have to upgrade the main cluster and then the Spot node clusters and things like that. So that's some of the things to keep in mind. Um, Quickly, this is how you will create a node pool. Right now, there is no UI support to create a node pool just based on Spot instances. As you know, the UI is a little bit behind when we are going through the preview because it's catching up to what we are doing in the CLI. So CLI, that's where, mostly preview features start. So that's why you have the CLI support to create the Spot instances. And I'm going to just go through it. It says priority Spot, eviction policy delete, and you can look at it. Spot max price -1. What that mean is, let's say that you don't care what the maximum policy for Spot is. You just want to say, hey, keep my Spot instance alive, even though price may be whatever the price is for the Spot instance, because it's still cheaper than the actual instance. Then you can set it to -1. If you want a fixed price, then you will need to put that price here in, it will be a float like 0.8. So per hour price or whatever that is, you will have to put it here. Okay. And these are some of the requirement, enable cluster, min count, max count. These are for any node pool, but this kind of makes an important, kind of factor for these, especially these type of node pools, like how big you want this node pool to be with Spot instances. So with that, that's the node creation. So let's say you created the node pool creation. So you created the node pool and it's running all of it. How you will make sure that you deploy your nodes, your apps to take advantage of this node pool. That's where this thing comes into picture. If you are familiar with YAML, what you will have to do is go into that, your YAML file to deploy the application. We'll take a look at that file in a second. and set this thing up. Yeah. That's where you scale priority. So this is the key. This is the value. This is equal. So keep a scale priority equal to spot, and that's the way you set it up. So what will happen is your app will be deployed on that node pool. Okay. Um, any questions before we go to like a short demo? Okay, so let's go here. Let me just go back to Visual Studio Code. And so first of all, I have a, um, so there are two apps. I'm just deploying a simple Node.js app. It is in this container registry that you saw deploying it. This is a simple deployment where I'm saying, this is my app, this is the app name, all the labels, and use this container to deploy it. No big deal. What this will do is this will deploy that to any nodes which are available. I'm not putting any restriction, okay? But then I'm deploying a second app using the same image just for the sake of simplicity. But here's what I'm doing. I'm saying deploy it on the Spot instances. So what it's going to do is it's going to deploy these instances on the using the Spot VM. So it's going to look at so there are two pools. It's going to look, oh, this is a pool with Spot instances. I'm going to deploy it on that. Okay. So that's what I have done. And one other thing, I have an ingress controller, and with that ingress controller, and by the way, this is not relevant to um, the Spot instance and all, but I mean, I'm accessing those two services. So first of all, let's take a look at the cluster. So I'm on that machine. What I'm gonna do is, I am going to use kubectl get pods dash n ingress basic. So this gives me all the pods. So as you can see, there is this one pod, Node.js. So there are three ingress controller pod. Don't worry about it. But look at these two pod, Node.js HW. This is the pod that is running um, on the standard node pool, and the second one, HW2, that we send to the um, to the Spot node pool. So let's take a look at that pod. So what I'm going to do is kubectl. Um, oh, come on, man, I can't type today. Kubectl describe pod, and I am going to use first of all this pod, the name of it, and the same namespace. Okay, so if you see here, look at that. I mean, toleration is this one, and it will show you. Uh, yeah, so this is the toleration that we set. So it is gonna be, this is the image ID, Docker, port, all of that information. Let me just do one thing, get pod. Okay, yeah, so basically it's kind of showing all the settings that we have, and it is scheduled on that, uh, on the Spot system it is set up. So give me one sec. Yeah, here it is. Look at the node. That's what I was looking for. You see, it is coming from AKS Spot node pool. And I can show it to you. I have created these two node pools. One is the node pool one, which is standard, and the other one is Spot node pool that I just created, which is basically using Spot instances and I can show it to you here. So that's you know, a manual auto scale. By the way, it doesn't say here that it's a Spot node pool, but we know that it's a Spot node pool because that's how we created it. Okay.
So it's just a quick, easy question. This is GA now, right? I'm looking on the docs online. It's 3/25/2020. Not preview. This is GA right now, yeah? Spot?
Spot node pool, yeah, that is GA.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, that is GA. That was preview for some time, but I think that is GA. Yeah, managed identity is still in preview, so just keep in mind. So yeah,
thank you.
So that is still GA, still preview. Okay, so let's go back to our screen. So if we look at the other one, I mean, let's once again get all the nodes, all the pods, and let's look at the other pod that we had. Let's see what type of information it will show. Oh, sorry, should use describe. Let me just describe the pod. And once again, if you see here, it is in the node pool 1, AKS, that node pool 1. You can see it from here. That's the one. Okay. So this is the node. So point is, that's how you can control it. You can take advantage of Spot instances in AKS. So we have 2 minutes. I know. Any questions? Okay, so as usual, I will upload the slide deck, and also I will upload a GitHub repo where I have these scripts, so you can, if you want to play around with it, you can go ahead and play with this stuff. Instead of like looking through documentation, I will add the links as well. So with that, I hope to see everyone next week for another session of Azure Power Lunch. Thank you again for joining. Happy Friday.
Thanks, Navi.
Thank you.